admissions process, I feel like I had essentially every privilege possible.
I was thinking, well, Harvard is kind of my top choice. It's not guaranteed that I'm going to get in, but this little bump, because my father went there, will put me over the edge.
It's painful for me to think that all of my hard work in high school was so irrelevant compared to the fact that I was able to check the box that my dad went there.
Legacy admissions is affirmative action for the rich. I mean, objectively, it's affirmative action for the rich.
Priorities, because also in California, you might have recall a news story from last year. There was some interest in the fire departments and the firefighters in California. And the interest was that there were too many white men who were firefighters, and we need to have a program in California to make sure we don't have enough white men as firefighters. So we have And yet, I'm wondering now, if your house was burning down, how much do you care what color the firefighters are?
You can respond and then we'll...
Listen, I am so tired. You know what? There was an article that just came out that said that actually the most educated demographic in this country right now is Black women. So let me be clear. Because you are a woman, or because I know that some of the right has been sharing these photos of the fact that I believe that the fire chief may be a woman or something, that has nothing to do with it. We are looking at qualifications. What diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been about is saying, you know what? Open this up. Don't just look at the white men. Open it up and recognize that other people can be qualified. And the fact that we want to, at a time when people are dying, decide that a country of immigrants is failing or people are dying because the same very people that built this country, because the last time I checked, y'all didn't say that anything was wrong with the White House. And I can promise you, it was my ancestors that built the White House. So listen, if we have been good enough to build this country, we are good enough to serve and die overseas. We are good enough to serve in other ways. And the fact that people actually decide that they want to engage in public service, whether it's sitting in Congress or whether it's serving on the fire department or the police department, should not be an issue. The fact is, stop trying to act as if only white men are the ones that are capable. Because right now, you're sitting at a table with 3 very capable Black women.
So who else is running things? This right here, ladies and gentlemen, this is the leadership of the LA Fire Department. I sure hope they know what they're doing.
Really was a decision to apply to Harvard. It was kind of like, well, of course that's where I would go. Of course that's where I want to be. Once you get in, they tell you,
you belong here.
You belong here.
You belong at Harvard.
Harvard Admissions Council, they do not make mistakes.
We did not make a single mistake.
Every single one of you has earned your spot to be at Yale.
And chose you.
Because you are the smartest, because you're the brightest.
You were selected from almost 45,000 applicants.
You are the best, I guess, that America has to offer. And that's not really the case.
I applied to like 15 schools and got into 2 or 3 of them. It's pretty telling that one of those places that I got into was the place that gave me an explicit leg up.
I think for a long time, I really grappled with guilt and self-esteem issues related to me attending Brown, because there was always going to be that voice in my head that was telling me, it's because you're a legacy student. It's because you're a legacy student.
I didn't want to be reduced to just, he's a legacy admit. It's like telling the world I don't deserve to be here. I'm a fraud.
I think there is a pretty natural human shame in admitting that you might not have earned something.
From birth, I've been given so many advantages. Both my parents are educated. They're doctors who went to Ivy League institutions.
I come from an affluent family that was able to send me to private school.
Before I got to campus, I was kind of filled with this tremendous sense of sadness. If not for these incredible strokes of luck, that befell me, where would I be?
Legacy students are overwhelmingly wealthy and they are overwhelmingly privileged in many ways that already give them a huge leg up in the college admissions process.
The Homestead Act of 1862 was part of this domestic transformation of the role of the federal government. What this Homestead Act was going to do was going to provide up to 160 acres of free land to Western settlers who would reside on it, improve it, and farm it in a way that would lead to greater agricultural prosperity for the country at large. It started to attract the initial settlers in 1863, but it didn't really take off until after the Civil War. It remained in effect until 1976 when it was finally replaced by other domestic legislation. But during that period, from 63 to 76, about 10% of all U.S. lands were covered by the Homestead Promise. Over 1.6 million individual claims under the Homestead Act during that period. It was an essential part of the westward settlement after the Civil War.
You think about the Homestead Act, one of the biggest quote-unquote welfare programs in the history of the United States. We didn't call it a handout. We didn't call it welfare. We called it nation building. In the 1930s and 40s, the FHA programs, the VA loans in the 40s and 50s, the GI Bill, all of these programs which were in theory open to everyone, but in practice racially restricted to whites almost exclusively, we didn't call those handouts. We didn't call that welfare. We called that good macroeconomic policy and the building of a middle class. What it did was create opportunities for white working class and lower middle class folks in terms of housing, in terms of job access, in terms of schooling that were completely closed off to everyone else. And here we are 100 years later, 50 years later, 30 years later, living with the legacy of that inequality, none of which has been uprooted, even with the progress that we've made. Because when you have people who have a huge head start, they're able to pass down those advantages to their kids and to their kids and to their kids. And so those disparities actually end up, in terms of wealth and assets, end up growing over time.